on Prime Crime.
You have no idea where this is.
The killing that changed it all.
It was a circus. It was unlike any other case.
And now all of a sudden your wife's missing? Are you kidding me?
You think I had something to do with her disappearance?
And the developments happening over 15 years later.
There is no, to my mind, justice that has been for Laci, for Scott, for Connor, or for either of the families.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to Prime Crime. This is where we do a deeper dive into the most high-profile and memorable true crime cases. And speaking of cases, we now have to get into one of the most famous criminal stories. This is the one that arguably defined the whole genre.
My daughter's been missing since this morning. She's 8 months pregnant.
It's Christmas Eve 2002. Ron Gransky informs police that his pregnant stepdaughter has disappeared.
She took her dog for a walk in the park. The dog came home with just a leash on.
That missing woman was 27-year-old Laci Peterson. Her husband was 29-year-old fertilizer salesman Scott Peterson. This couple from Modesto, California may not have been known at the time, but they would soon become household names across the country.
My son-in-law called. He went playing golf morning at 9:30.
After Laci vanished, Scott sits down with police.
Just tell me about the morning.
I got up at, 8 o'clock probably or so. Showered. We were watching her favorite show, Martha Stewart. Watched a little bit of that.
The absence on his part, that kind of cool, cold, dismissive demeanor that he presented with.
He's been married 4 years.
Yeah. 4 or 5. I guess it's 5. They got married in 97.
So you were married in 97?
I believe so.
I didn't make much of the tape. Scott was calm, in control. Keep in mind, he never confesses to anything. He gives his version of events.
According to Scott, unlike what Gransky had told police, he didn't golf that day. He says it was too cold and instead decided to go fishing.
When did you realize you were going to go fishing?
Oh, that was a morning decision. It seemed too cold to go play golf with the club, so.
You're telling me that it was too cold to golf, but yet you decided to go fishing in an open boat, in open water, out there in that bay where arguably is one of the coldest places and uncomfortable places that you could possibly be, in hopes that you're actually going to catch something.
How long do you think you stayed in the water?
Felt like an hour and a half or so.
It seemed that Laci didn't know he was going boating, so he would have been arguably unreachable to his 8.5-month pregnant wife, which seems a bit odd. 2, he didn't normally go boating.
Okay, so then what? You drive home. You see your dog out there?
Yeah.
And he still have his leash on? Were you calling for Laci or?
Oh yeah, of course.
To me, it sounded like a reasonable story. He was out, he comes home, his wife's not there. He's called her a couple of times, but there was nothing strange or inculpatory about his story.
The search for Laci Peterson grabbed local and national headlines. Not only did law enforcement conduct a widespread investigation, but the public became engrossed in the case and took an active role in the search as well.
What's left is the flyers, the canvas tomorrow, the media coverage.
Although Scott himself participated in the investigation and search efforts, many people believed he seemed a bit off.
He presented with a lack of grief. He wasn't just missing his wife, he's missing this unborn child.
What concerns me the most is the fact that your dog came home with a leash on. That bothers me. I mean,
No question.
yeah.
That was what everyone was fixated on. Everybody talked about was the way he behaved. Well, he smiled at the vigil. he hugged somebody. Look at what he's doing or what he's not doing. No one knew what Scott was like prior to all of this. People react in many, many different ways.
What concerns me most is doing anything I can to further progress.
I appreciate that. And I don't want you to hold it against me. I mean, sometimes I hate asking.
You got to do it.
But I do. I really do have to do it. And
Yet was Scott Peterson totally honest with police? As you'll see, not quite.
you guys didn't have any problems, marriage problems?
More when we return.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
What you're telling me, Scott, is you have no idea where this is.
It's December 25th, 2002. Scott Peterson is speaking with Modesto detective Al Bronchini about the disappearance of his pregnant wife, Laci, who vanished the day prior. He claims he went out boating, returned home, and Laci was gone. Yet it's his seemingly indifferent attitude during this investigation, as well as some odd details in his alibi, that left many suspicious.
You know about what time you left Modesto?
Gosh, I don't know.
Scott Peterson was holding a secret, though. A secret that the world was about to find out.
Received December 16th at 5:44 p.m.
Hey, sweetheart. Gotcha.
In a stunning revelation, a 27-year-old massage therapist named Amber Fry comes forward in January 2003 and admits she was having an affair with Scott.
Anytime you have a scenario where a wife goes missing, the husband is going to be the first person that police look at. Now add the idea that there's an affair going on. You have a potential motive.
You guys didn't have any problems, marriage problems? Everything's good?
Let's assume Scott's completely innocent and his wife goes missing. If you're Scott, do you want the world to know that you're having an affair and have been lying to your wife and lying to the woman you're having an affair with? Do you not realize that that's going to make you the prime suspect? So you might want to cover it up.
What Scott didn't know was that when the news of Laci's disappearance hit the headlines, Fry began to work with police and recorded her calls with Scott. In one of the most shocking moments, while at a vigil for Laci, listen to where Scott says he is.
Amber. Hey, Happy New Year's. I'm near the Eiffel Tower. New Year's celebration is unreal. The crowd is huge.
The recorded calls with her were so damning. It goes into this kind of master manipulation mode that he's in. His wife is missing. His child, who is unborn, is missing, but yet he wants to continue on this charade.
It's pretty awesome. Fireworks there for the Eiffel Tower.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you guys decided to go out.
Scott eventually comes clean to Amber about his missing wife.
See, we're staying. Sorry, Amber. I have not been traveling during the last couple weeks. I've lied to you when I've been traveling.
Okay.
The girl I'm married to, her name is Laci.
Not only had Scott lied about his marriage to Laci, he even told Amber he was a widower.
You deserve so much better.
Yeah, and I deserve to understand an explanation of why you told me you'd lost your wife and this was the first holidays you'd spend without her. That was December 9th. You told me this, and now all of a sudden your wife's missing? Are you kidding me?
Gotta come out of space.
There's no question he is lying to Amber Fry about his relationship with his wife. There's no question he's lied to her about a lot of things in regards to what's going on in his life. With that said, there is not a single moment in any of those calls that he ever confesses to anything.
Of course you couldn't tell me the story about your wife because it hadn't happened yet. And you were hoping to resolve in January that it'd be resolved and you'd have a story to tell me.
You think I had something to do with her disappearance?
Well, let's see. How can I believe that? How can I believe that? How could I believe anything for...
I am not evil like that.
I would hope not.
I am... Oh, my God.
For Scott Peterson, this was only the start of his problems. In April 2003, the whole case changed. The bodies of Laci and her unborn son Connor are found. Days after the gruesome discovery, Scott was arrested, and he would later be charged with murder. But why was Scott arrested? Up next, we'll get into the evidence in the case and what it tells us.
It is arguably one of the most horrific things that has occurred relative to a familial event like this.
Even if we continued in a relationship and the cops could come over and arrest you for Laci's murder,
No,
how can I be sure this will not occur?
because I had nothing to do with it.
In April 2003, law enforcement did officially arrest Scott Peterson for the murders of his pregnant wife Laci and their unborn son Connor. This came after months of speculation that Scott was the killer, especially since it was revealed he had been secretly cheating on Laci with a woman named Amber Fry. The bodies were found washed up in the San Francisco Bay, only a few miles from the Berkeley Marina, a location that was very problematic for Scott.
When you got in your boat and you took off, did you go very far? Or?
Well, I mean, probably a couple miles. I went north, and I just assumed it would be a decent, shallow area.
Scott, from the very start, says that he was boating on the waters on the day she goes missing, and the bodies are recovered in that exact location.
Okay, so you fish for 90 minutes about, then what? You go back to the marina. Get back.
In fact, canine dogs tracked Laci's scent to the Berkeley Marina. Yet there was a major issue for investigators.
So the cause of death is undetermined. The level of decomposition that had occurred, first off, you're talking about salty to brackish water, which is very harsh on human remains. And we can see evidence of potentially this post-mortem feasting that had taken place. It was marine life that did this. When you're missing significant elements of the body, it's really hard to make that determination. How did Connor's little remains wind up in the condition that they were in? He had certain little injuries on his body, and he also had tape around his mouth, neck. What was the origin of that?
Not only could authorities not pinpoint how or even where Laci was killed, but no murder weapon was ever recovered. In fact, there was no significant forensic evidence connecting Scott to the murders.
Okay, so then what? You drive home. Okay, what you do when you go in?
Put my clothes in the washer.
Okay, then what?
And jump in the shower.
However, authorities did find a few things. A comforter from the Peterson home stained with what appeared to be small blood spots.
Was she wrapped in this? Was this something that she was laid upon and then attacked?
Additionally, hairs consistent with Laci's were found on a pair of pliers recovered from Scott's boat.
I don't think much about the hair on the pliers, and I say this because, Scott and Laci lived together. It wouldn't be unusual for Laci's hair, Scott's hair, to be on Laci, to be on Scott.
A lot of the reason I went was just to get that boat in the water to see, yeah.
Law enforcement discovered something else. There was evidence that Scott had made 5 cement anchors, but only one was on his boat.
These were purposed, I think, in this case, to hold her body in place at least long enough so that her body was so compromised by decompositional changes. Tide may have had an impact on the final resting place of both her and Connor.
Coming up, what happens to Scott Peterson is not easy to answer.
There's a whole entire nation in this. You don't think that they have a right to know?
Hi, I'm Dan Abrams. In the exploding legal and true crime genre, Law&Crime is the only network that has it all.
Good evening and welcome.
This is a complicated case.
Don't really jump to conclusions.
Welcome to Prime Crime Tonight.
Another day of drama between both sides.
From multiple live trials daily to original and compelling programming, the Law&Crime Network is everywhere, and we invite you inside the jury box. This is Law&Crime.
Think all court shows are the same?
We're talking about your father. Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Think again. Judge Caprio rules with common sense.
I was having contractions. I was rushing to the hospital.
Inspector Quinn, what does justice demand? Jail?
And compassion.
I'm going to take the circumstances into consideration.
The best court experience I've had.
Clearly, Judge, he's been in a court before.
Get caught in Providence.
There's no possible way I had anything to do with it.
On June 1st, 2004, the trial of Scott Peterson began, the man accused of murdering his pregnant wife Laci and their unborn son Connor back in December 2002. This trial was groundbreaking.
It was a circus. This was one of probably the first cases, if not maybe the case, that I think triggered this huge interest in true crime, because it was unlike any other case as far as the attention and the obsession and the high emotions involved.
The defense had a huge advantage: no confession, no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no evidence of how or where Laci was killed. Peterson's legal team also had an alternative theory of what happened, which was tied to a burglary across the street from the Peterson home.
After she came back from her walk, she came across these burglars, confronted them, and they in fact kidnapped her, killed her, and dumped her body.
The prosecution was armed with circumstantial evidence, from authorities discovering the bodies in the very area where Scott had claimed he had gone boating, to when Amber Fry, Scott's mistress, the woman he had lied to and had cheated on Laci with, took the stand.
This case was nothing until Amber Fry walked into that courtroom. She was someone that the jury wanted to hear from. They viewed her as a victim of Scott Peterson. They viewed Scott in a very different way once they heard the audios between Amber Fry and Scott Peterson.
Stand in my shoes and look through my eyes. What is it that I'm supposed to perceive of all of this? How many lies you've told me?
I would consider me a complete who's done something to Amber that she does not deserve. And question if you could ever trust me again.
After a 6-month-long trial and days of deliberations, the jury convicted Scott Peterson of the murders of Laci and Connor, and he was ultimately sentenced to death.
All of this circumstantial evidence came together without necessarily the aid of a lot of forensics, and was powerful enough that it convinced a jury of his guilt.
I still don't think that there was enough evidence to convict Scott. People hated him, and for them, that was the evidence of it.
The story, though, is not over.
The President of the United States Supreme Court and this court, of course, say that the erroneous dismissal of a single juror constitutes constitutional error.
In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott Peterson's death sentence.
When the judge was voir direing the jurors, the big mistake he made is that any potential juror who indicated that they did not believe in the death sentence were immediately removed as potential jurors. Well, that's not correct. You have to continue to ask them whether or not, despite their feelings, they can still impose the death penalty. He didn't do that.
Yet life in prison without the possibility of parole may not be the automatic future for Scott. At the time of this recording, there's a chance his convictions could be thrown out too, and he may receive a whole new trial. This all due to the alleged misconduct of a trial juror.
On the questionnaire, they were asked if they'd ever been a victim of a crime, and her answer was no. But in reality, she'd been a victim of a crime not just once, but twice. She was, in fact, pregnant at the time. So she was literally in the same shoes as Laci Peterson.
We kept exposing or finding what I called at the time stealth jurors, meaning jurors who were lying and had an agenda to get on here. We caught a couple of them in real time. This juror, we did not. If this juror did commit what it appears she did do, then the verdict itself is tainted and must be thrown out.
A new trial for Scott Peterson would be interesting, especially since Scott's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, has been adamant that she has new evidence proving his innocence, namely that Laci was alive when Scott left the house.
This time around, I know the defense is going to have a chance to show that there's other suspects involved. Additional information about the timeline, people who had seen her walk.
If you play it out, there's no way they convict him. There is no, to my mind, justice that has been for Laci, for Scott, for Connor, or for either of the families.
Every defendant should have their chance at a fair trial. This is the right time for him to have that trial. I know that there's still people who have made up their minds, but there's plenty of people who have not. I am hoping that it's going to happen soon.
You said you've lost your wife.
No. Yes.
How did you lose her then, before she was lost? Explain that.
There are different kinds of loss, Amber.
Then explain your loss.
I can't to you now.
There is much more evidence to indicate that Peterson is, in fact, the culprit and that they did get the right man in this case, because it points back to Amber Fry. He's a womanizer who didn't care about his family. He was going to separate himself from the burden of being married and certainly with Connor on the way being a father. When you're working with the arithmetic in this case and you begin to think, who in the world would have had that level of motivation to take Laci's life? I think that your final answer at the end of the day is Scott Peterson.
Scott Peterson. That is a name that many thought would never be back in the news. Will he get a new trial and present new evidence? At the time of this taping, it's still up in the air. The question of if Scott's the real killer and what exactly happened to Laci and Connor, that is one that continues to be debated and thought about even after all these years. That's all we have for you here on Prime Crime. Leave us your comments on Instagram and Twitter with the hashtag PrimeCrime. As always, thank you for joining us. And until next time, be safe.